Hey everybody, welcome back to Tech Talk Education. In this video, I want to continue on walking through using Metasploitable 2, and I want to also introduce you to one of the coolest cybersecurity products on the planet, which is Metasploit. So I think this will be really informative and educational and fun. Let's get started. Well, in previous movies, I have talked to you, I think, about a company called Rapid7, and I really like these guys. They are the ones that built Metasploit, and they're also responsible for Metasploitable 2. And after having used this tool for quite a while now, I have realized the sensibility and the wisdom that these people had. So they created Metasploit, and it's not the easiest tool in the world to learn. It's very, very powerful. But in addition to that, they created Metasploitable 2 so that you can have something to practice against. So that's why we want to learn Metasploit. It's one of the top 5 or 6, I think, that's in your toolkit for somebody that's involved with cybersecurity. We're going to have Metasploit, we're going to have Nmap, we'll have Ettercap, we'll have Wireshark, we'll have some other tools, the social engineering toolkit, and some others, but Metasploit is just so flippin' cool. So I want to show you how to use it, and I'm going to use Metasploitable to do this. And so in this movie, I just want to show you some basic techniques for how to use Metasploit to hack Metasploitable. Now, of course, you're going to need Metasploitable 2 running, and you'll need Kali Linux, and then of course I do all this in a virtualized ethical hacking environment. So I have pfSense and I have Metasploitable 2 loaded, and now I've got Kali Linux running. Before we get too far down the road, I want to talk to you about what are called Metasploit modules. And a module, you can think of it as a library that contains certain information that you're going to need for operation with Metasploit. So there are several of these. I'm just using Notepad here to show this to you. So there's a thing called an auxiliary, and what an auxiliary does is exactly like it sounds. So something that you add on after the fact. Now the big guy is called an exploit. We're going to get into a computer, we're going to grab what's called a shell, and then we're going to do some work within that shell. So the idea is we want to connect to a computer, could be anywhere in the world, and we're going to exploit it somehow. We're going to get into it somehow, hopefully grab a shell, and then when we're done getting our shell, maybe we launch an auxiliary that does some work for us. There are other things that are called encoders. So the idea is that maybe you think there's a chance of detection, and I'm talking here ethically. I want to discourage you from trying to do any black hat hacking that will land you in jail if you're not very good at it. There are people that are really excellent at it that live in countries that are not the United States, but if you're living in the United States and you're not very good at this, you shouldn't practice black hat hacking. All of this is for you to learn how the black hat hackers work. What an encoder does is it says, you know what, there might be a danger of me getting found out. And so what we can do is we can literally encode it. We can scramble the message so that it makes it much more difficult to discover what's going on. Along those lines, there's a thing called evasion. And so the idea is that if we think that we're being tracked, we can evade that. And so that's another module. The big guy, the 800-pound gorilla, is exploits, the idea that we're going to get into a system somehow and we're going to do something with it. We have a thing here called no-ops. Now, what that means is that if you're thinking about something running in a computer's memory, what we do with a no-ops is we say, well, we want to take the next adjacent memory address over, and so what that's going to do is it's going to shift the activity away from the current running program. So it's called a no-op. We have payloads. Now, a payload is a really interesting thing, and we're going to have to talk about that in a bunch more videos because you can create your own payloads. But a payload is after you get in using an exploit, what you want to do is you want to drop off a payload, and it's going to do some work for you, whether it's going to allow you to talk to the machine later on, it's going to create an evasion, it's going to run some code, we just don't know. But a payload is something that you drop off onto the machine once you have a shell. And then there's a thing called post. Now this is after you've hacked the machine, then you're going to run some post modules, something inside post that does some work for you after the whole thing is all said and done. So these are the modules that are inside Metasploit currently. Additionally, I want you to know that this is called Metasploit Framework. And when you see the term MSF here, like you see it here, we're talking about the Metasploit Framework. What is that? Well, it is a complete gathering of tools and modules that we can use for the purpose of hacking a computer. And it's called the Metasploit Framework, MSF. So there are several things inside of it. By the way, Metasploit was written in the Ruby programming language, and you may well want to learn Ruby if you get really excited about Metasploit, because a lot of the activities that happen, a lot of the exploits that you run and things are written using Ruby. Today there are some Python shells, that some Python exploits that have been written, but for the most part Metasploit is a Ruby environment. Ruby's a pretty old language. It's been around a while now. And so there are some things that are inside the framework that you should be aware of. The main thing you're going to use on a daily basis is called msfconsole. I'll show that to you in a minute. Then we have what is called the database, my MSF database. And ironically enough, the database is PostgreSQL, which is a very common open source database. It's well known. And so you have the ability to save things into the database or get them back out as needed. And this is going to be a more advanced topic that you won't probably touch on in your early experience with Metasploit. There's a very, very cool command line tool. It's called MSF Venom. And, you think about, a snake and it's biting you and it's injecting venom into you. That's the concept. And what MSF Venom does is it allows you to create payloads that you can then drop off onto a computer. And then this isn't the only thing that will create payloads. The social engineering toolkit can do that as well. And then the coolest part, I think, of Metasploit is called Meterpreter. This thing is a bad boy. This is really cool. What it allows you to do is to advance your capability when you grab a shell. You get a shell into a computer, and then you can run a Meterpreter, and that you can think of Meterpreter as a shell on steroids. There are millions of commands for it. Very cool. And so we'll do a video later on how to use Meterpreter. But that's what we're dealing with when we're talking about Metasploit. Okay, now Metasploit lives in, I'm going to change directories to user, share, Metasploit framework. That's where Metasploit lives. And if we hit enter, we're going to go to that folder. If I do an ls, we're going to see what's inside the folder. And you can see that there's a bunch of stuff. We've got modules. We've got in this green here, there's MSF Venom. That's a command line. We've got an update here, MSF update, and some other things. You can see here there's Ruby. We have some plugins. And there are some scripts, and we'll talk about that later. That is even more advanced than Meterpreter. People have written a bunch of scripts for Metasploit, and I'm going to be honest with you and tell you that the scripts have been deprecated, but they're still in use, so you can use them. And then lots of other things going on here. Let's change directories into modules. So I'm going to cd into modules, clear the screen and do an ls. And you can see the modules that we talked about before. Think of a module as a software library that does specific things for you, and you'll have the right idea with regard to Metasploit. Let's change into the exploits folder, cd into exploits, clear the screen and do an ls. And you can see here that we have a bunch of exploits. We've got everything for, like, IBM has a version of Unix called AIX. HP has a version of Unix called HPUX. We have OS 10. We have Novell NetWare. I don't know if there's any more of that around. We have Windows. We have Unix. We have Solaris, which is owned by Oracle Corporation. OpenBSD, which is another version of Unix. We can do some stuff with Firefox. So you can see that we have a lot of things going on here that we can use in terms of exploits. And then I want to show this to you real quick. I'm going to go ahead and cat example underscore Linux. Oops, I forgot to put an underscore in there. Underscore Linux underscore, dang it, I can't spell today. Underscore priv underscore escape. I have to look at my keyboard because I can't see it. And this .rb means that this is a Ruby file. So I just want to show you what Ruby looks like when you're looking at it. Oops, cat, I misspelled something. I continued to spell it as Linus, not Linux. Okay, and I still have a misspell here. Okay, I had an EXC as opposed to an ESC. So let's see if this works. So I'll hit enter, and we should be able to cat that out. I catted this out, and here's what it looks like. And this is Ruby code that you're looking at. There's a couple of cool things here that you could pick up by looking at a Ruby module that's been created, a Ruby exploit or whatever. And so one of the things that's pretty cool about it is you get the email address of whoever wrote this thing. And you can see it's a big thing. And so up here in the comments, we'll come down here a little ways. Normally it'll tell you who wrote this particular module, and you might get an email address out of there. You can see a bunch of includes that are commented out. You can include other things if you want to. And so that's the idea behind a Ruby module. All right, so I'm going to hit enter here. And I'm going to do an ls. I'll clear the screen, and I'll do an ls here. And you can see that you've got a bunch of different folders in there as well. So that's the idea. You can surf around through Metasploit, and you can get a look at what is happening within the framework. And you could even write it down or catalog it somehow so that you know what's going on. And I'm sure there are lots of data catalogs that have been developed. One thing I will tell you is that Metasploit continually gets added to. So it may be that if you look up an older video or something like that, a web page, and they have the file listing of everything that's inside Metasploit, it's probably we've added to it. So you'll probably want to go through and map this yourself if you can. I'm going to go home, and I'm going to clear the screen. Now, let's find out for sure that Metsploitable is running. You've seen me do this command before. So we're going to do a sudo netdiscover. And I love this command because what it does is it reveals to you everything that is on the network. And you can see here that 1.101 is my Metasploitable box. So now that we know that address, I can Control-C out of here, clear the screen, and I'm going to finally start Metasploit. And you start it using msfconsole. That is the big guy. When you're getting ready to run Metasploit, you're going to type in msfconsole. You don't have to be root to run it. You will see this thing happening while it's loading up the code. And then you get what is called a banner. There's your banner. And you can change the banner. So the banner command is banner. And it'll automatically update the banner. There's hundreds of them. I don't know how many are in here. Also, you should be aware that Metasploit uses the Linux command set. For example, I can type in clear to clear the screen inside Metasploit. I can type in ls. It likes that command. So we've got different commands that we can use. The Linux command set does work inside Metasploit. All right, now what I want to do, I want to remind you that we had port 21 here. And this is TCP, and it's running some software called vsftpd 2.3.4. Now this is the reason that you use the TAC small s big V switch when you're running Nmap, because you want to get the software version of each of the things that are running inside your particular little the machine that you're trying to get attacked to. And so we have, you can see that we've got SSH, well, it's running OpenSSH 4.7 and so forth. Well, so this is what the TAC little s cap V switch does for you with Nmap. And this is great. Now, I want to introduce you to your next command. And so what we want to do is we want to look for that particular thing. So I'll come back here, I'll highlight this, I will copy this selection, and I'm going to introduce you to a new command in Metasploit. It is search. So I'm going to search for, and right click and paste, I'm going to search for vsftpd 2.3.4, and I hit enter. I get one thing. Now I want you to take a look at this because you have a number, and forgive me, I'm going to go ahead and widen this a little bit more so that it's a little bit easier to read this screen. Okay, I just widened the screen and then reran the command. And you can see here that we've got the number is 0. Now what it's going to do is if you have a bunch of these, it's going to list a bunch of things that it finds and it's going to put them in numerical order. And so it's saying that the 0th exploit that it found is in the Unix folder FTP vsftpd 234. Now you should know that vsftpd is still around. They still make FTP software. And with this particular version, they deliberately created a backdoor that allows you to get into an vsftpd installation, and that turned out to be really bad for them because people found out very quickly that they could hack it. It was disclosed on 7/3 of 2011. It's an excellent chance of getting into a machine if you want to use this particular remote execution command. This thing check means can I check to see if it's going to work against the machine, and it's currently set to no, and there is a command called check. So let's say that you go ahead and you load up an exploit, and if it says check is set to yes, you can type in the command check, and what it'll do is check and make sure it's going to work against that particular software that you're trying to run it against. And then it gives you information about what it does. Well, so here's your next command. We are going to use 0. And so now it's all loaded up. You can see here, I'll clear the screen. Well, I'm not going to clear the screen just yet. You can see that it is an exploit, and it's getting the exploit out of this particular folder. And it's telling you that there is no payload configured. However, it's going to default to this payload. What do we mean by that? Well, we're going to run the exploit, and once we get that shell, we've gotten into the machine, and we can see the shell, we're going to drop off a payload. And in this case, it's going to be a Unix payload to interact with the system. Now, what is a shell? Well, this guy here is a shell. This is a shell. When you're in Windows and you do CMD, that's a shell, or you do PowerShell, that's a shell. There are two kinds of shells in Linux. There's what's called a non-login shell, which is what this is, and then another type called a login shell. And we'll have a movie about that later on because it's a little bit different conversation. But in this case, what we want to do is we want to grab a shell on that Metasploitable box. The next thing that we do, because we want to issue commands and run against it and things like that. Now here's your next command. So we're going to show options. You will always use this command regardless of whether you're loading up an auxiliary or an exploit or anything like that. There's two sections to this one. You've got a module option here, and then you also have a payload option right here. And so the payload option doesn't need anything. The module option does. You can see that it's telling you when you have something that is required, a required setting. These are settings that we have to set, and these are all set to no. However, it does need to know our host. Now, what does that mean? Well, that stands for remote host. And the remote host is the machine that we're trying to connect to. In this case, it's our Metasploitable 2 computer, and then there is a remote port. And does it match port 21? Yep, it sure does. There we go. Okay, so the only thing that we really need to set here is our hosts, because the port has already been put in for us. However, if we were going against a different port, we would have to set that. Additionally, you can see in green here you have a command called info. And if I type in info, it's just going to do exactly what it says. It's going to give me information about this particular exploit. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set our hosts, and I'm going to type in the address 192.168.1.101 of my Metasploitable computer, and sure enough, it tells me that it's got that set. Now I can always validate that it's set by typing in show options. And I wanted you guys to know that you don't need the word show. I didn't find that out till last week. And here I've been typing in show all this time, and I didn't need to. Also, if you're looking at documents or whatever, a lot of times they'll type it in capitalized. It doesn't need to be capitalized. You don't need the word show, and you don't need to type in options in capitalized form. You can just type in options, and it'll work just fine for you. So now it's loaded up our hosts, which is required, and the port is required. This is an exploit, so the way to run this exploit is to type in exploit and hit enter. And it goes ahead and looks to see if it can hit that machine, and if it does, it says I found a shell. And we are in tall cotton now, because now what we can do is we can issue commands. Now take a look at what it's telling you. So it's telling you that we're on the Kali machine, and I went out through port 36013, and I connected to the Metasploitable box on 1.101 on port 6200. Wait, 6200? I thought it was port 21. Well, yeah, that's one of the magical features of this thing, is that you are using something different, and that may be something that a security operations center isn't looking for example. So the concept is that we're always trying to stay in the shadows, lurk in the shadows while we're doing this covert work. Now, how do you know that you have the session? Well, one command you can type in that you'll probably always type in initially is who am I? And you hit enter. Oh, well, look at that. It says that I am root. That's very, very cool. We like that a lot. We are root, and I can type in ls, and I can get the entire server folder directory. I can cd into temp, which is an area in which I might want to do some hacking. Temp is very popular for dropping off payloads and things like that. Now I want to show you a second command in Metasploit. This is a very cool feature. And so what you can do is you can take and background this session, meaning I can leave this session open, but I can go away from it and do other Metasploit things. So what you do is you type in the command background, and you hit enter. The system asks you, do you want to background this thing? And notice here that it's telling you that it's going to do session number 1. And we'll say, yes, we want to do session number 1. I'm going to clear the screen. Now the command to see if you have a session or how many sessions you have is sessions, plural. You'll always have to key in the command sessions, and it's going to show you that you have a shell. You're using a Unix shell here, and you're connected to the Metasploitable box. So that's really cool. Okay, we've got the shell. How do I go back to this session? Well, you type in the command sessions, and then you do attack I for ID, and then you can see here that Metasploit has given you an ID for this session, and you just type in that session number, and you're back. You can do a who am I? Boom, there I am. You can re-background the session. And there we go. Yes, I want to re-background it. I clear the screen. Okay, let's see if we can do another command here. So I'm looking here at my Metasploit output here, and I see that I'm using port 139, which is NetBIOS Samba. Now, we've talked about this before, the idea that you can create a share in Windows. You're using NetBIOS to do that. NetBIOS precedes TCP/IP, and it's been in use all this time, and the idea is that I can share files and folders out so that other people can come across the network to get them. Well, it's been put forward, and now it's in Linux, and it's called SMB. It stands for Server Message Block, probably one of the most hacked protocols on the planet. And in fact, SMB is so useful, it allows Macintosh and Linux and Windows computers to all share files with one another. There was a service that was created inside Linux called Samba. It's just a play on words. Samba is a Latin dance, and somebody saw SMB and they thought, oh, that's really cute, I'm going to call it Samba. And it's running the SMB daemon here. It's spelled D-A-E-M-O-N. It's pronounced daemon. and this is version 3x to 4x. Well, let's go see what we can find about how we can get into this machine on port 139 using Samba. Let's go see what we can do about that. Well, all right. So if I do a search for Samba like this, I'm going to get a whole bunch of listings, 25 listings, some of which may not be helpful. So maybe what I can do is I can revise this search by doing a search for Samba version, SMB_version. And we remember that SMB stands for server message block. Oh, and what it's going to do is going to show us the version of something. Maybe this will be useful for us. Now note that this is an auxiliary here. It's not an exploit, it's an auxiliary. Well, let's try running this and see what's going to happen. So I'm going to say use 0. Now remember that we have our backdoor into Metsploitable running all this time. So now what we can do is go ahead and investigate auxiliaries and see what we can grab here. I'm going to clear the screen and I'm going to say show options, or you can just type in options here. Now you're going to notice a couple of things as you scroll up here. The only thing it needs is R hosts. And also please note here in the green that you can type in info. So if you type in info, it's going to give you information about the command. Let's see, did I do that right? Info, enter. Yep, and you can get some command information about the command here. But in this case, all we need to do is set our host. So I'm going to set our host to 192.168.1.101 and hit enter. And now it tells me that that auxiliary is equipped with that particular address back to the Metasploitable 2 machine. But if I run options again, you'll notice here that there's also an option called threads. Now what a thread is a way of having a particular program execute multiple times all at once. And in this case, we're saying that we're only allowing one thread. This might take a while, so sometimes it's best to update those threads. So I'm going to do a set threads, and I'm going to set it to 16. Okay, now we've got threads set to 16. If I do options, I can see that both of those things are set. The way to run an auxiliary is to type in the command run. Here's a hint. You can run an exploit using the command run as well. So we'll run this and see what we get. Now here's the important information that we get out of this. All it's doing is finding out the Samba version, and it's saying that it is Unix Samba 3.0 2.0 Debian. So I'm going to copy this stuff right here. I'm going to grab this in between the parentheses and copy it. I'm going to go out to Firefox and I'm going to look for this. So I paste and go and see what I can find. Now once I do that, I pinged Samba 3.0.2.0 Debian. What it does is it returns a bunch of lists here. And the thing that I'm really interested in is this phrase here, username map script. That might give me something to go on inside Kali. So what I'm going to do is come in here to Metasploit, and I'm going to search on username map script and hit enter. And I get a couple of hits. Well, this is good. What this tells me then is that I can get a backdoor. It's an exploit here, and I can get a backdoor into this particular environment through Samba, now not through port 21, but now through port 139, and I can get a backdoor. The other one, which is not going to be good, is Oracle, because this doesn't have Oracle server running on it, so, and it's set to a normal rank. In this case, it's set to an excellent rank. So I'm going to go ahead and use 1 here, and then I'm going to go ahead and say check. By the way, you see here that it's going to do a reverse netcat shell, and we have to talk more about netcat as a very versatile tool, but we'll talk about that in another movie. So we hit check, and it's going to say we couldn't do anything here. That's because I don't have rhost set. Sorry about that. So I'm going to do options, and I look up here and I see that my local host here, me, this is the Kali box, is 1.100. And I want you to notice here that our local port is 4444. This is a very, very common port that you'll see when people are teaching you how to do exploits using Kali. So we're going to use port 4444. and then it needs an rhost thing here that I did not set. So let's go ahead and set that. Set rhosts to 192.168.1.101, and I'm going to do a check and see if this will work for me. This module does not support check. Well, we already knew that because it said no in the check environment, but there are times when you can check it and see if it will work for you. Okay, so this is an exploit. You can tell here it's an exploit. It's not an auxiliary. We used an auxiliary to get some information, but now we're going to use an exploit. And let me minimize Firefox here. And we're going to go ahead and run this. So we type in exploit, and run will work for you just as well. And now what it's doing is it's starting a reverse shell, a TCP handler, on port 4444. So what this means is we're going out and then we're coming back, and we are able to connect with the machine using what is called a reverse shell. And we went out on Kali box port 4444, and we hit it, and it's returning back to us on port 42878. And we can do a who am I and find out that, boy, we're root here, so we're in good shape. Do an ls just to make sure everything's cool. cdn to temp and make sure it works. Boom, it works. Now we can background this thing. So I'm going to do a cd ... to make sure that I'm back at the root. And I'm going to background this session, like so. Okay, close the screen, type in the sessions command, and I can see now that I have two sessions that are working within Kali here, or within Metasploit here. Very good. Okay, so now that is really, there's one other thing that I want to show you. And if we go back here and we look and we say, well, okay, is there anything else that I could do right now? Something that looks juicy to me that I might want to try to use Metasploit to hit. Well, actually, there's a lot. But in this case, we hit port 139, which is Samba. We hit port 21. Let's look down here and see if there's anything else that might be hittable. Oh, there's VNC. So you may not know what VNC is. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my Firefox box, and I'm going to look for, I'm going to say, what is VNC, for example? I might query Google just to find out. And it says all you need to know. It stands for Virtual Network Computing. It's a screen sharing system. Now, if you guys are in Windows and you've used the Windows Remote Desktop Connection, it's called RDC, and you're using the Remote Desktop Protocol, you'll be familiar, very familiar with what VNC does. All it is it's an early version of being able to remotely connect into a computer. And of course, here this question, is it a security risk? Why, yes it is. And let's look for what is the VNC protocol, because this is interesting too. So it uses a protocol called Remote Frame Buffer. It's called RFB, and this is just strictly informational, but it's good to know that we have another protocol that we need to be concerned about. Now in this case, we're going to have to look and see if there's an auxiliary that we can use that will work for VNC. So you could just search VNC and you might get some hits, and yeah, you get 128 hits. And what we're interested in is we're interested in searching for an auxiliary that we can use, because we already have two open shells. We don't need to generate another exploit. So let's search for a scanner for VNC and see what that brings up. Oh, that's quite a bit better. That looks really good. Now, as we're looking at these, this one looks kind of juicy to me. It's an auxiliary, and it says that it's going to give us a VNC login, and it is normal, and it's for VNC authentication scanner. Okay, let's try this one. So I'm going to say use 3 here. And of course, just like before, we type in options just to see what our options are. And I'm looking through here. Now there's some stuff to which you want to pay attention with VNC. This is going to be a little bit more. First of all, you should know that this scanner does a brute force on passwords, which is very cool. I really like that. And we come down here and we see that our password file is located here. So it's built right into Metasploit. There's a password file for us to be able to use as we scan for this thing. We've got good old rhost. It's required. We've got some other stuff that's not required. Now there's some things that I want you to look at that you probably want to pay attention to. Stop on success is required, and it's currently set to false. But what we're saying here is, hey, if you find a valid password, go ahead and stop for me, okay? And so we're going to set that to true. So we're going to set stop on success to true. Notice here that it's going to go in through port 5900. Is that true for VNC? Yep, there it is. That's the port we're going to use. Okay. Threads is a little low. I think one thread might be slow, especially if we're using a remote desktop feature. And then this thing here, user as pass is not required. You can see here it's set to no, and it's set to false. But I'll tell you why this is interesting. Because, you know, a lot of times you have a default username and password that are the same. For example, to get into Metasploitable 2, the username is msfadmin, the password is msfadmin. Sometimes routers come in and they're set for admin. And so this would be handy if we set this to true. So we want to set these things. So I'm going to set user as pass to true. Set user, whoops, I got too many S's there. User as pass to true. And so you can see now that it shows that. Okay, let's go see what else we had to set. Threads. So we're going to set threads pretty high. I'm going to set threads to, let's go with like 32, quite a few of them. And I'll scroll up through here. What else did we have to have? Well, we needed our hosts. So let's set the R hosts. So I'm going to set R hosts to my Metasploitable box, 192.168.101, like that. And then is there anything else that we said that we might need? Verbose is set to true, which means that it's going to show you everything that it finds. And let's see, stop on success is set to false. Let's go ahead and set that. So we'll set stop on success to true. Okay, beautiful. Now we have this. Now this is an auxiliary. So what we do is we run the auxiliary. And the thing to keep in mind here is that this is a brute force password hacker. What it's going to do is try out passwords to see if it can get into the system. So let's see what it does. It was very, very rapid here. And it shows us that there was a successful logon for using the password, which is, you might figure that because after all, we are dealing with Metasploitable 2, and they've set a bunch of loosey-goosey stuff for us. So that's pretty good. So now what we want to do is we want to log on and see if we can. I forgot to mention, by the way, that if you type in info, you can get a bunch of info on this command, and you can scroll up through here and see what it tells you. Now, another thing I should point out to you is there is a database out in the world. It's shared amongst a lot of people. It's not just these people here. But there's a vulnerability database. And what happens is when we find a vulnerability in a computer and we report that to authorities and it gets tested and corrected and all this stuff, what happens is it gets put into a vulnerability database, and it's called the CVE. So initially, the National Institute of Standards logs this thing, and it gives it what's called the CVE number. CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures, and you can see that this thing was found in 1999, and it is the 506th vulnerability that was found, and it was put into the NIST database here. But the idea here is that you'll need to know this phrase CVE. When you see it, it's going to be Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures, and then you could search exploit database for, say, VNC, and find some hits for VNC server, things like that. Notice also that it's telling us that this supports the RFB protocol, which is what VNC uses. Okay, so let's run this guy. We already ran it. And now what we can do is we can use a command vnc_viewer, and I can type in the IP address of the Metasploitable box and hit enter. I put an underscore in there, and it doesn't need an underscore. So I'm going to come back here and get rid of this. Boom, and we hit enter. And it needs to know a password, and we were told when we ran the this auxiliary that the password is password. And lo and behold, there is our VNC session. Now what we have is we have 2 sessions that are being held. We used one of those sessions to be able to run the VNC, use VNC to get in because we're using VNC in an auxiliary fashion, and it'll work the same way as it did before. Oops, I typed in the wrong command. ls is what I meant to do. So that's all I've got for now. I just wanted to show you how you can use Metasploit to hack Metasploitable 2. Now we're going to do a lot more with this. I'm going to have some more videos coming out that show you more advanced Metasploit. It's an incredibly cool tool. But for now, the movie's pretty long, so I want to say adios and thank you for listening. I really appreciate you guys listening to me, and we will see you in the next movie. Take care.